Okay, so since everybody and their grandma have now been talking about these newly released UAP files or UFO files, I figured I'll throw in my 2 cents as well and discuss a few things as well, including certain scientific studies that came out in the last few months. But in case you're here to have your opinion reinforced and want to hear about how this is aliens and they've been visiting us for the past few centuries, you might want to proceed and go to the next video. I'll wait. But yeah, basically, every single picture released so far has not been very impressive. For example, what even is this? Some kind of a Zeppelin? What about this? I mean, to me, this looks like a helicopter. But because everything here has been redacted, there's basically no way to tell anything about this picture. Now, what about this? I don't even know where to start here. And here we have a picture where literally everything is redacted, followed by a tiny dot. Which is why let's actually shift our attentions to something else. Let's discuss a bit of a history and how something very similar has happened before, and how this will also be seen the same way approximately 50 to 60 years from now. And basically here, I wanted to discuss the unusual craze in the late 19th and early 20th century. A wave of fascination that swept the Western world, where they were not actually looking for aliens or UFOs, but for spirits from beyond. And the thing is, even though many people don't realize, in the late 19th century, and especially during the Victorian era, this wasn't just a hobby for the superstitious. This was treated as a legitimate field of research and was known as the psychical research, with a lot of prominent scientists of the era, including a chemist William Crookes and a biologist Alfred Russel Wallace, treating these seance rooms, as they used to be known, as laboratories. Here's actually a really bizarre picture of so-called ectoplasm that was captured over a century ago. And the reason I personally find this funny is because, as you'll find out, that's not ectoplasm. But in essence, here, a lot of scientists used some of the most advanced technology of their time, including reflex cameras, thermometers, and somewhat advanced microphones, to try to detect cold spots, unusual sounds, or basically anything, in order to find any evidence for this afterlife and the world of spirits. With many researchers even believing that this was based on a physical substance from pre-Einsteinian times referred to as ether, with the ether basically acting as a kind of a bridge between the living and the dead, except that it took a couple of decades to prove that ether was not real. And basically within just a few decades, this entire field more or less fell apart, with a lot of these early ghost hunters eventually discovering that most of the stuff was completely made up, and things like ectoplasm was basically nothing but chewed paper or torn fabric that was made to resemble something produced by a ghost. And the reason I wanted to start with this is because there is a very striking comparison between this and this. The very similar obsession, or a kind of a modern fixation with UAPs or unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UFOs. Both movements share a deep public desire for answers and follow a kind of a recurrent scientific pattern. 95 to 99% of all of these reports are eventually explained by either known objects, natural phenomena, or simple hoax. But in 2026, in order to divert our attention from, maybe some economic problems, possibly some war, or some other undisclosed documents involving some unusual characters, the United States government has now officially released even more of these files under the initiative referred to as Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters, PRUSU for short. And even though they released over 160 files, some even dating back to the Apollo moon missions, the majority are sort of like this. But the ones from the Apollo missions are possibly interesting because they might be showing us some kind of a visual phenomenon that is not familiar to us, assuming of course this is real. Now for example with this, it's not entirely clear what this is, but it is possible to be some kind of an electrical effect produced by the static on the moon, although the majority of scientists so far concluded that in most cases this is possibly either the reflections of sunlight from the lens or an effect produced by high-energy cosmic rays hitting the camera sensors, which is very, very likely since, by being on the moon, the astronauts were actually experiencing a lot more cosmic radiation than what we're used to right here on planet Earth. But because this was just released like a few days ago, I'm not really going to speculate about this anymore, except that I'm definitely going to guide you to this channel, where Mick West is most likely going to go through all of them individually in the next few months. This is essentially the only channel that's worth watching if you're interested in an actual explanation for what we're seeing in most of these videos. We'll talk about some of the mixed discoveries in a few minutes. But in essence, so far, even though this might sound fascinating, because I like to maintain a very skeptical, fact-based approach, here none of this right now seems unusual or in any way extraordinary, involving something out of this world. For example, in this video that was circulating a few weeks back, Mick West has already definitively shown that this extraordinary motion of this bizarre object was once again just the unfortunate result of someone inexperienced watching this video and not understanding what they're looking at. And so this object that appears to weave through a wind farm, in reality actually moves in a very straight line, with the illusion of erratic movement simply being caused by the drone operator moving the camera with a joystick, and the drone capturing this, moving by 180 degrees and creating a parallax effect. Yet somehow this was once again turned into this extraordinary story of some kind of a super technology. This was a balloon, just so that we're clear. The video by Mick in the description explains exactly what we're looking at. And so in pretty much most of these videos, there is a very simple optical illusion explanation, where some kind of a slow-moving object, usually a balloon, appears to move super fast because the camera itself is moving very fast too. But much more importantly, we did have two separate scientific reports in the last couple of years that came to identical conclusions. And the first report was from AARO, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, that was led by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who testified in front of Congress after reviewing over 650 individual reports. And so here we're talking about an actual physicist who went through all of these files and who definitively concluded that there is basically nothing unusual going on. Nothing exhibited evidence of either extraterrestrial activity or technology that defies laws of physics, with the emphasis being that the majority of cases involved either balloons, drone swarms, or, more recently, in a lot of cases, the visual reflections from Starlink satellites that were moving across space and reflected the light in such a way that it appeared to be something bizarre. As a matter of fact, most of the reports from pilots in the last few years were all attributed to Starlink. But apart from his report, we also had an independent report by NASA that reached pretty much the same conclusion. No signs of aliens anywhere, no signs of unusual spacecraft. Every single phenomenon observed was either the result of parallax or some kind of a terrestrial phenomenon that was just misidentified, with NASA's main recommendation also suggesting that relying on these blurry or vague pictures is just not going to get us anywhere, and is really not how science should be done at all. And while we cannot talk about aliens and stuff without mentioning this guy. Now, Avi Loeb obviously has also been doing his own stuff, and has produced a few papers, along with several other researchers, based on the Galileo project at Harvard. And essentially here, they are trying to build these ground-based observatories in order to have calibrated instruments and in order to conduct a kind of an aerial survey. So basically, instead of relying on these blurry pictures or eyewitnesses, they're trying to make this a little bit more scientific and objective. And so they're trying to track the skies using specific cameras. But after conducting a 5-month-long test and capturing 500,000 individual objects, they discovered that the vast majority were just birds, planes, leaves, with only 144 cases remaining ambiguous. But not like UFO ambiguous, instead just resembling something that was very difficult to identify, but nothing unusual. You can learn about the results from the study in the description below. And so basically that's where we kind of are. Right now, nobody really knows exactly what's going on and what any of these pictures are, but we are getting some studies here and there, with some scientists trying to pursue this. But we should also not forget the historical context of the Roswell incident in 1947, because technically this is how it all started. This fueled decades of alien theories and sightings of flying discs, but as we know today, based on a lot of facts, this was all a result of a secret project referred to as Project Mogul. And that's because in the pre-satellite era, United States tried to spy on the Soviet Union by using these long trains of high-altitude balloons in order to listen to Soviet atomic bomb tests and to analyze the data. Here's roughly how big these balloons were. But because one of them crashed and the government decided to cover this up with the weather balloon story, except that it just looks super weird, this eventually led to the alien myth that we have today. A myth that just refuses to die. And so, based on all of this, what have we learned so far, and what do we actually know? Well, factually, not much. We know that UAPs are a real concern for aviation safety and national security, which is why the government has been watching them and studying them for the past few years. But we also know that so far pretty much everything has been confirmed to be either a drone, a balloon, or some kind of a satellite glint, and not something extraordinary and unexplainable. And while a small percentage of cases still remain unexplained, it's really because of lack of data and lack of good pictures, and not because it's something paranormal. But obviously pictures like this, and even maybe pictures like this, could point at some kind of a new phenomenon, assuming this is something physical and not just the result of cosmic rays hitting the camera. Except that even in this case, any kind of extraordinary claims will still require extraordinary evidence. And even after many decades, we just don't have strong enough evidence to make any conclusions. Which for someone that's skeptical, like me, means that I'm just gonna wait and stick to the data and actual physical observations. Right now, I don't really see anything paranormal anywhere. But like I said in the beginning, chances are that in the next 50 to 60 years, we might be seeing this particular period in a very similar light to how we see this. This bizarre search for spirits from the beyond is actually driven by a very similar curiosity and the desire for answers as what's basically happening right now. At least that's my 2 cents. But anyway, if there are any scientific discoveries worth mentioning in the next few years, I'll definitely come back and discuss this more in future videos. Until then, check out some of the previous videos on the topic, including the one that investigates alleged UFO sightings inside astronomical fleets based on a project known as POS. And while even here, the answer is very mundane and does not involve anything extraordinary. On that note, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support the channel Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining a channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support the channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.